Sushi. It's old. Very, very old. Older than you can possibly imagine. But not this roll. No, this specific roll is, at max, around 60 years old, and probably closer to 50, or probably closer to maybe a couple of days. That is because it is a California roll, the most popular roll in all the sushi eating world. The humble California roll fills up our shopping carts, our plates, and ultimately, our bellies. It's a simple recipe, just rice, seaweed, avocado, cucumber, and imitation crab. Every sushi newbie I've ever eaten with took a look at the menu and then, with fear in their eyes, ordered a California roll. It's comforting, it's healthy, and above all, it doesn't have any complicated shit. It's without baggage. Vegetables and fish. God bless America. God bless Japan. Aha! Wait. Not quite. Not quite at all. The California roll, actually, comes from neither Japan nor America, probably. It, probably, came from the lovely, rainy Vancouver, Canada, where a Japanese fellow named Hidekazu Tojo invented it in his 20s in the 1970s. It became the most popular roll on the west coast of the United States of America, and by 2025, the most popular roll in the whole wide world. Canada, of all places. That's not an insult to my neighbors to the north. If anything, they've been more gracious than I would have been, considering the fire hose of shit coming from my American shores. When I express surprise at the California roll being Canadian, it's more a commentary on the journey that sushi has taken, from one side of the world to the other. Sushi's ancestors first came to existence at least 12,000 years ago. Now, that sushi, called narazushi, is not exactly the same kettle of fish that we eat now, but you'll hear more about that soon. 12,000 years. 12,000 revolutions of the earth around the sun. History has run side by side with that little bit of rice and fish wrapped around it. Billions of lives come and gone. Empires built and crumbled, and yet still I sit in my favorite bar eating buttery soft salmon with rice and seaweed, just like some long dead fella in a bar did hundreds of years ago. That's what I love about history. We're all bound together across space and time, not by violence, certainly not by conquest, but through our shared experiences. Let's get in the time machine. Sushi, you might be surprised to learn, began as a storage device, a U-Haul center for salt-cured freshwater fish, probably as far back as the Neolithic era, and first showing up in a Chinese dictionary in the 4th century. That's right, folks, the original sushi wasn't even a Japanese invention. It didn't get introduced to its adopted home until the 9th century, 500 years later. It originated in China. The Han people came down the Yangtze River and delivered unto me, thousands of years later, my favorite food in the whole world. This kind of sushi was called narazushi, which means matured fish. Freshwater fish were salt-cured, packed into cooked rice in layers, and left to ferment for months and months. When the fish was ready to be eaten, the rice was thrown away. This use of fermentation and fermented rice started in Southeast Asia and can be seen in dozens of dishes across Asian cultures. Indonesia, the Philippines, Vietnam, so many more, all use fermentation of raw fish in some of their most popular dishes. This method and style of cooking, of preserving these fish, was a necessity, as wet field rice paddies often flooded with excess freshwater fish. This was a pain in the ass in some ways. I mean, just God, man, look at all these fish. And a boon in others. God, man, look at all these fish! You simply layer the cut up fish with rice in some sort of container and leave it there until you're ready to eat it. Narazushi is still made in modern times. often called funazushi, especially when served in the Shiga prefecture. That particular version of narazushi is often made with crucian carp. The carp is descaled and cut open, and the insides cleaned out. Salt is stuffed into the interior and sprinkled over the top before placed into a saltwater brine and closed off for an appropriate amount of time. Once that appropriate amount of time is up, you cook some rice and wash the newly pickled carp, making sure all the salt and scales and whatever else are totally and completely gone. Then you dry it, making sure all the water is drained out of the cut open fish. You layer the fish in with the cooked rice and seal it up and leave it to sit, letting the lacto fermentation of the rice finish off the process. This can take months or years to complete. I bring this all up for two reasons. One, so you may admire the craftsmanship and hard work that goes into creating this dish. I mean, I didn't even include every single step, and I didn't describe in full the steps I did. The second reason is, having heard all of that, you understand fully why sushi began to evolve into what it is now. Before, it was a food of necessity, a way of conserving and maximizing resources. But you can trace the advancement of human civilization through its food, first and foremost, and over the years, they got much, much, much faster at creating this dish. How does one make sushi faster? Well, in this case, instead of leaving the fish and the rice for months or years, you take them out in weeks or months. And, to not waste resources, you eat that fish with the rice. And, you realize that the flavors are perhaps a little more subtle, perhaps a little more palatable than the truly overwhelming narazushi. And thus, you have birthed namanare, or raw ripe, or partially fermented in English. A sushi that, because of the quicker fermentation period, is more raw than narazushi, and one that doesn't take a full baseball season to be ready to eat. This change took place over the Muromachi era of Japanese history, corresponding to the years 1335 through 1573. The quicker creation process meant that sushi began to proliferate across Japan. This creation of sushi got even faster as people began to use fermentation accelerants like mold, sake, and vinegar. This became more and more common going into the 16th and 17th centuries, and due to those accelerants and other technical improvements, some dishes were made in a week to 10 days. This improvement in speed was also partially due to the improvements in Japanese diet. As a people, they went from 1 or 2 meals a day to 3, increasing the need for faster food production. Namanare is still not quite modern sushi because it still involved a fermentation process, a thing our modern version does not have. The first emergence of modern type sushi began in the Edo period, corresponding to the years 1603 through 1867. This sushi, called hyazushi, or fast sushi in English, eliminated the fermentation process of the rice and instead mixed the rice with vinegar, which was already fermented and thus gave the same sort of sour flavor that it would have had otherwise. Now you could eat the fish and the rice, but it wouldn't even take a week to make. It could be made right in front of you with no lag time at all. Variations of hyazushi include tsugarazushi, or fish-shaped sushi, bozushi, or bar sushi, in which the rice is stuffed into fish with the head still attached, or oshizushi, pressed sushi, which is vinegar, rice, and fish pressed together. This was the dominant form of sushi for centuries until the 1820s, when a sushi chef named Hanaya Yohei either invented or perfected the technique of nigiri sushi, or hand-pressed sushi, in his restaurant in Ryogoku. This is pretty close to the modern-day sushi we eat now, though it used far more rice, far less vinegar, and was a tiny bit less salty. One other difference is that nigiri sushi of that era was often marinated in soy sauce or vinegar or salt, or some combination of the three. Raw seafood sushi didn't become the norm until, well, refrigeration became the norm, a century or so later. In 1923, wasabi became a popular ingredient in sushi, especially in the nigiri form of a long piece of fish over rice. Nigiri sushi has wasabi underneath the fish and onto the rice, which kind of bonds them together, and it adds flavor and heat, as well as some possible antibacterial benefits. Nigiri sushi in Japan can be broken down, broadly, into two separate styles, kanze and kanto, or idome. Kansai Sushi is where nigiri originated, in that restaurant of Hanaya Yohei, and was very concerned with the preservation of the fish as it was further away from the ocean. Often the rice has more sugar than the Kanto sushi, and is better able to hold its shape when pressed into an oshizushi box, which is a special container made just for that type of sushi. It is often served with a lighter soy sauce. Kanto sushi, or Idome sushi, uses a darker soy sauce and is more like the nigiri sushi we all know and love, a long piece of fish stretched over rice with a little bit of wasabi. That sushi rice is less sweet, and toppings are more common, and a less sweet rice is crucial so they don't overpower those toppings. A final fun fact for this section. Resources were limited after World War II, particularly rice. You couldn't just sell it willy-nilly, even in restaurants, which greatly limited the sushi industry. Thus, after some time, a workaround was found. If a customer traded 1 cup of rice, then they could receive, in return, 10 pieces of nigiri sushi. This idea, which saved the sushi industry from extinction, quickly spread across the country. The only bad thing was that only nigiri sushi was eligible for this scheme, and thus other ways of making sushi fell by the wayside. Let's return to the California roll, and put a bow on this whole thing. I want to give a little more context on what I said before, that the California roll was probably invented in Vancouver, Canada. Hidekazu Tojo has claimed that he was a sole inventor, as I previously stated. The Japanese government gave him an award for service to Japanese cuisine, so at the very least, he was a popularizer of the roll. There are 2 main other contenders for the roll, both of which are based in California. Hey, California roll. The first time those words were written was in 1979, once in the Los Angeles Times newspaper and once in a newspaper in Ocala, Florida. In later reports, a chef named Ken Sousa at the Ken Joe restaurant in Hollywood was given credit for inventing the roll. This was the dominant claim well into the 1990s. The second main contender was also a fellow from Los Angeles, one Ichiro Mashida. Allegedly, according to his assistant and many others around the restaurant at the time, he invented a version of that roll. One that resembles but isn't quite the same as the one that became ubiquitous. Truthfully, what we're probably looking at is some combination of marketing and exaggeration. It's not a complicated machinery, that California roll, and simultaneous invention happened with fucking calculus of all things, so simultaneous invention of the modern California roll does not strike me as all that strange. I give the gold to Hidekazu Tojo because the Japanese government gave him that award for Japanese cuisine, and that's as good a tiebreaker as any. The California roll has gone all the way back around to being served in Japan, as well as in the West. Often called California maki, you can find it in restaurants and convenience stores. American sushi, or Western sushi, is not Japanese sushi. They are 2 different things, with 2 different goals built across different ladders of culture. But they are a shared experience, a way of connecting across the divide of different cultures and languages. The California roll and Japanese sushi and Chinese sushi are in conversation with one another. They're all branches from the same tree.